Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm Jan Wouters. I'm the director of the Leuven Centre for Global Governance Studies at KU Leuven. And it's really great to welcome you here also on this kickoff conference of the Engage project. In fact, we are currently at 141 participants, but we have more than 450 participants signed up for this conference. So we're really extremely grateful and slightly overwhelmed by the great, participation in this conference. What I will do with you is to go a little bit through the conceptual framework, the structure also of the project, and the rationale of the Engage project. First of all, the conceptual framework. As you have heard from Angel's presentation, the goals of Engage are very ambitious. We want to contribute to shaping and directing the conversation on the Union's external action, with a focus on security and defense. That task includes more than just exploring how to best achieve the predetermined goals of the European Union. It is also entailing a more fundamental discussion on what the objectives, the principles, and the expectations should be in the first place. But we firmly believe that this ambitious goal is attainable in the next 3 years, because indeed the Engage project mixes highly informed academic analysis with more policy-oriented problem-solving skills. So let me tell you how exactly we plan to achieve those objectives. First of all, Engage will enhance our understanding of what it means to be a coherent, legitimate, and effective actor in global politics. These are familiar goals for the external action of the European Union. They appear in various official documents. But what do they actually mean when we analyze an organization that, let's face it, has unique supranational features and that operates in a contested and fast-changing global context? To find out, our conceptual framework unpacks the external action of the European Union in 4 concentric circles. And those of you who had already logged in a little bit earlier will have seen the beautiful opening video in which those 4 concentric circles were beautifully displaced. At its core, we have CSDP, the Common Security and Defense Policy, and issues of security and defense that are, as we know, well understood traditionally. But then we have a second layer, the second concentric circle, in which we analyze the broader area of foreign policy of the Union and its tools, which we know, of course, as the CFSP, la PESC, the Common Foreign and Security Policy, however, without losing track of the foreign policies of our member states. Then there is a third layer, which refers to areas of the Union's external action, such as trade, development cooperation, and humanitarian aid, where it can be argued that the Union has, let's say, competitive advantages because of its size, its competences, and its know-how. And finally, we also included a 4th layer of what we call external action plus. What are these? These are internal policy areas of the Union, but with increasingly an external dimension, such as, for instance, education policy, such as health policies. And within Engage, we also understand, of course, that any conversation about the Union's security and defense cannot ignore other important issues, such as the crisis of climate change and of the environment. So that's the multi-layered framework. But following that framework, we also want to give directions for an external action of the Union that is joined up. And that means that we will indeed pay close attention to the interplay between the EU's external action and the foreign policies of its member states, but also to the coherence among the EU policy areas inter se, but also between the different institutions of the European Union. And we also want to explore how the EU's external action can be sustainable over time. Why? Because this world, as Engel has already indicated, is moving very, very fast. 18 months ago, a global pandemic caught this planet by surprise. We were unprepared. 5 years ago, a disruptive victory of President Trump looked very unlikely. The latest NATO strategic concept of 10 years ago did not mention China at all. It emphasized possibilities of cooperation with Russia. And 22 years ago, Dr. Javier Solana was taking up the challenging position of High Representative for Common Foreign and Security Policy, the very first High Representative under what I would call the arrangements of the Treaty of Amsterdam. And that, of course, was an intense moment too for reshaping of the external action of the European Union. We are again in such times of repurposing and reconfigurations. The world can look very differently in a matter of just months. And while the ENGAGE project is not a foresight study, it's not a foresight exercise properly, we do have the aim to explore how to make the EU's global actions resistant and responsive to political, economic, and other future evolutions and shocks. Now, a few words about the structure of the project, and this is, of course, what typically in an Horizon 2020 project is so beautifully elaborated into what we call work packages. I will try to not use technocratic language to explain the structure of the project, but indeed, to realize all these ambitious objectives, the research and analysis within the consortium is going to be developed within 11 interconnected and complementary work packages. First of all, we will provide an analytical grip on the contextual hurdles, both international and domestic, that the European Union faces in the implementation of its external policy. We are already currently exploring some of the challenges of world politics, including major trends relating to fast technological change, great power competition, and socio-economic dynamics. We will hear more about these challenges in our discussion panel today. This initial work will point us to the priorities of the European Union in the areas of security and defense, but also of external action, broadly speaking. They will also point to what is acceptable and legitimate to the European public, to politicians and decision makers when it comes to the Union's actions outside of its own borders. That's the first thing. The second part, that work of contextualization that we have done in the first place, should allow us to explore in that second moment how to revamp the EU's governance architecture, the governance architecture of CSDP, of CFSP, and other dimensions of the EU's external action. We will map, we will assess existing structures, explore ways to improve and enhance external action with available tools and legal frameworks, and when necessary, making proposals for change. Last week, for example, ENGAGE co-organized a webinar on qualified majority voting in CFSP, exploring with both, say, practitioners and senior academic experts, compatibilities, but also incompatibilities between the current structures of EU CFSP policymaking and the ambitions, the global ambitions of the European Union. And while we know that there are real obstacles to an effective foreign policy and decision-making processes that relate to divergences between the member states and to some of the structures and processes we have laid down in the treaty, in that same webinar, we also found that there are solutions, there are approaches possible even within the current structures of the Treaty of Lisbon. So it's obvious that we're also going to focus on that. A third moment now. In a third phase, the Engage team will focus on the study of the performance of the EU's external action. We will look, for instance, at how the EU and its member states interact with their strategic partners. We will analyze, among other relationships, the obstacles and the trends and opportunities for transatlantic relations. We have all followed the intense diplomatic week of the G7, of NATO, of EU-US summits, and besides, this week is also featuring important other meetings with Russia, as we know, but also with Turkish leaders. And those two countries also figure prominently in the Engage project. And we want to understand how the EU acts and reacts to its neighborhood, and how it responds to conflict and crisis scenarios. In particular, we want to explore how the Union can further improve its performance as an actor in conflict prevention, mediation, and resolution of conflicts. There is little doubt that the Union will remain active in these fields. And the Council is, as you probably know, currently on its way to agree on a civilian CSDP mission, an EU training mission in Mozambique. Engage will look at how this and similar initiatives fit within the external action of the EU and how decision-making, funding, and implementation can be enhanced. That's what we also will be looking at the changes, at the challenges and the possibilities later today, including in the keynote of Dr. Rosa Balfour. Then about the rationale, and I will end up here, because all of this contextual, conceptual, and analytical work within the Engage project is meant to converge in the end into a strategic document, the cornerstone of Engage. We have modestly called it a white paper for joined up, coherent, sustainable, and effective external action. Our white paper will produce policy recommendations, first of all, on the institutional framework and the governance structures of the EU. Secondly, on the strategic objectives and the key goals that should guide an effective external action. And thirdly, on policy mechanisms needed to improve the capacities and capabilities of the Union's external action. It will be the result of 3 very intense years of research, interviews, consultations, and debates. And that's really going to be an extremely interesting period for all of us. All of the deliverables, as we call this again in, say, the typical Horizon 2020 speak, all of the deliverables and the recommendations of Engage will be targeted at policymakers across the European Union, including at the level of the member states. And we hope that the output of the Engage project, above all its white paper, will spark an inclusive and representative EU-wide conversation on possibilities and limits of the EU's external action. Let me end by a quote. At the end of his presidency, touring Europe in late 2016, just as Joe Biden did this week, President Barack Obama said, and I quote, "The whole world needs a strong, prosperous, democratic, and united Europe," end of quote. At Engage, we agree with that statement. The world now is perhaps more unpredictable, unstable, and challenging than 5 years ago at the end of President Obama's presidency. And exactly because of this, the world needs a strong, prosperous, democratic, and united Europe. And we hope that we will contribute to that endeavor of building a Europe that is a force for the good in the world, with clear goals and clear means to reach them. Hence, in little than 3 years, when we circulate the Engage white paper for joined up, coherent, sustainable, and effective external action, we will hopefully be contributing actively to a conversation on the future of the European Union in world politics and in global governance. Thank you very much.